Coming up.
An affordability crisis? I don't know why you wouldn't use all your funds to attack the affordability issue, to attack this. I mean, nobody makes more money on housing than governments.
I believe I heard you say to our colleague from Quebec that you believe the National Housing Strategy has exceeded its objectives. The Nanos Pocketbook Index that came out this week showed that young Canadians are at an all-time low in the history of the index in how they feel about their personal finances. Do you consider that exceeding your objectives?
Minister, the federal housing advocate told CBC News on February 14th that homelessness encampments represent, quote, a physical manifestation of exactly how broken our housing and homelessness system is from coast to coast to coast in Canada. Would you agree that encampments show how broken our housing and homelessness system is in Canada under your government?
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
I would like to welcome our witness, Minister Sean Fraser. Welcome, Mr. Minister. We'll now begin with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Appreciate it. I'll get right into it. I wonder if you would agree that development charges, which you mentioned in your opening remarks, actually make houses more expensive, make homes more expensive. It's a tax.
I do.
Okay. The Housing Accelerator Fund, which I know is a signature policy of the government, is a $4 billion fund designed to speed up home approvals and get more homes built. Is there anything in those agreements within those cities about development charges and cities that increase development charges at the same time as receiving federal dollars?
The development cost charges that we seek to address are dealt with through the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, not through the Housing Accelerator Fund. So in order to access the infrastructure supports, you won't be able to increase your development cost charges. That said, just a bit of nuance on the Housing Accelerator Fund. It's an outcomes-based program. We both get measures that you agree to implement, but you also have to produce the permits. So to the extent a community increases development cost charges, to a degree that doesn't allow them to meet the milestones baked into the agreement, they would jeopardize their funding under the agreement.
So you would agree, though, that the housing crisis we have in this country is not just a supply crisis, but it's an affordability crisis?
Yes, certainly.
And so I guess my question would be then, why wouldn't this Housing Accelerator Fund also include some kind of language in these agreements, which we've still yet to see, about the cost at the local level?
Look, it's an interesting question. We want to have the right tool for each job. The Housing Accelerator Fund was targeting specific changes we wanted to see made around municipal zoning reform and the process of permitting so we could build faster. I agree with you that development cost charges create a real challenge on affordability. And what we're saying with the infrastructure programs we're putting in place, if you're going to benefit from federal money for the infrastructure, you can't also be increasing your development cost charges that goes towards building that infrastructure. So we've chosen unique tools for each of the problems that we're trying to solve for. And the Housing Accelerator Fund, in my view, is having a tremendously positive impact, but we're tackling the development cost charge issue through a different federal program.
So let's take Ottawa, for example. They just proposed to increase their development charges by almost 30%. They've backed off a little bit. It's only going to 11%. The notion that they're going up at all anywhere in the country is absolutely mind-boggling in an affordability crisis. These accelerator funds are not paid out all at once. They're paid out in quarterly payments. And from reading the staff reports of some of these, and we haven't seen the agreements, but reading the staff reports, it would appear as though you and your office have final say on whether they get their next payments and whether they, get each quarter. So Ottawa's already received $44 million, I guess. The next chunk will be another $44 million. Would you be prepared to, address Ottawa or any of these other cities that have received or, recipients of this money to say, we need to focus on affordability as well and prorate the next payment or even not make the next payment if they keep increasing development charges?
We would need, because development cost charges are being dealt with through a different fund, we would need to see them fail to meet their obligations under the binding agreement that we have with each city. In this case, if they increase development cost charges to a degree where it impacted the permit milestones that they've agreed to achieve, then certainly we would withhold funds. No permits, no money. That's my approach to some of these conversations. However, if they increase the development cost charges, still implement the zoning reforms, continue to speed up the process of permitting and actually get the permits out the door, we're not saying we're not going to touch the development charge issue. We're saying we're going to use a different fund to tackle the development charge issue. So if they fail to produce the permits as a result of those changes they make, they would jeopardize their funding.
Minister, here's my question, I guess. In an affordability crisis, I don't know why you wouldn't use all your funds to attack the affordability issue, to attack this. I mean, nobody makes more money on housing than governments. The average across the country is about 33% per unit. And I don't know how big your infrastructure fund is, but, you know, your accelerator fund of $4 billion, why wouldn't you use that fund too?
Well, look, it's interesting, and Scott, as you know, I've got an immense respect for you as you're one of my favorite colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I'd invite you to have this conversation with your leader.
Some of my colleagues are offended by that, I think.
And I like all of them. I like all of them. But truth be told, it's curious that I get these questions from the Conservative side when there's no such plan, releasing your housing plan that actually attacks the development cost charge issue. You were mayor in Huntsville, and you had a modest increase in development cost charges at the time as well.
I used to fight development charge increases all the time as a municipal mayor, and we gave land away, and we waived fees and charges.
And we're seeking to address the cost through a number of different measures. We can't just deal with it through one fund. We have to pull a number of different levers. We're trying to deal with it by reducing taxes, by putting low-cost financing programs forward, by putting public land on the table that we're going to be able to use to reduce the development costs by not selling it off to the highest bidder. On the Housing Accelerator Fund, we wanted to have a targeted approach to tackle very specific problems around municipal zoning, around the time for permitting. We do want to address the development cost charge
Can I cut you off
issue.
there then and ask you another question about, do you think it's working then? If cities are increasing their development charges so much? The City of Toronto just increased them 20%. In the City of Vaughan, it's $153,000.
So the development cost charge issue through the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund is a fund that we've just funded through the federal budget. If cities have made these increases, we put the date at April 2nd. If they don't abide by a freeze as of that date, they're going to jeopardize their eligibility to tap into these funds going forward. Separately, I do think the Housing Accelerator Fund has been effective, and we're starting to see in some of the cities that have had deals actually increase the rate of issuing permits. It's too early to tell the specific degree to which this is going to pan out, but the projections over the next decade from cities, not from the federal government, indicate a projected increase of 750,000 building permits over and above what was scheduled to be the case.
And we're out of time.
The leader of the opposition was in Hamilton last week, and as part of his Make Canada Great Again tour, and he went down the nonsensical path of talking about gatekeepers and demonizing municipal councillors, municipal mayors, over the whole issue of their efforts to block housing development. And anyone who served for one budget cycle around a municipal council, and we have, I think, 3 mayors in attendance here today, a couple of former city councillors, knows that new assessment is the lifeblood of a municipality. It pays for the existing services and helps pay for new services that a municipality wants to provide. So it is counterintuitive for municipalities to block any kind of development, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial. So this whole narrative in terms of gatekeepers and municipalities blocking and preventing us from building new housing supply is nonsensical. We, as part of the 2024 budget, topped up the Accelerator Fund to get at the whole issue of new housing supply and incenting changes at the municipal level. And there are a number of municipalities, Minister, as you know, who want to take part in that program. Langley is one of them. Sudbury, our colleague, is fighting hard to ensure her municipality gets her fair share. Can you share with the committee why it is important to work with municipalities rather than demonizing them for their efforts in terms of trying to build new assessment in their municipalities?
Look, certainly, and some municipalities are better than others. And my sense is no one that I've met who serves on a municipal council says that they want to block housing. But you do see some of the attitudes that are reflected in certain districts at a given council table reveal themselves to be in an anti-housing position because they don't want to have an apartment in the community where they live. But my experience with the Housing Accelerator Fund has been illuminating because it's demonstrated to me that communities across Canada want to embrace the growth opportunity, but it comes with certain challenges. And having a federal incentive on the table makes it easier for them to address those challenges. What I was blown away by when when we published the list of best practices that had emerged through the early applications that we assessed through the Housing Accelerator Fund was the degree to which communities were willing to increase their ambition when it came to doing the things that we know will produce more houses, including adopting 4 units as of right zoning, more density near public secondary, post-secondary institutions and transit stations, digital permitting processes that'll speed up the process. We started getting letters and phone calls from municipalities saying, what more can we do in order to give ourselves a chance to succeed in the Housing Accelerator Fund? And the cream rose to the top. There are other good applications from some of the communities that you've mentioned that may not have qualified because so many of the competitor communities decided we want to do even more. We have a $400 million top-up in the recent federal budget that's going to allow us to partner with additional municipalities, and we're going to work with those most ambitious cities. So from my perspective, although I have gotten in a few disagreements with municipalities across the country, overwhelmingly, my experience has been one of willing partners who want to do more but need help. We need to have different levels of government pulling in the same direction. And I find, although you may find yourself in a disagreement once in a while, if you don't have the conversation or you shut down the possibility of the conversation at the outset, you miss out on an opportunity to make a meaningful difference.
Kenora District, 33.5% children live in poverty. That's staggering. They're facing cuts of over 50%. North Bay, DSAB, they've been trying to create this integrated homelessness hub, yet their funding is scheduled to drop 70% so that they would get by on $245,986. I mean, what are you going to buy with that? Nothing. So can I go back to Northern Ontario and tell our communities that they're not being left behind, that funding is going to be bridged? Because they're being told right now to prepare for cuts, so they're having to make decisions now about walking away on programs that help the homeless.
So the specific amount for each community, if I had that information today, I would give you that information today. You'll see in the budget that there was a major top-up through Reaching Home. That will translate into an increase. The specific dollar amount I will get to you as soon as we have. We should also discuss the other opportunities through newly funded programs, including addressing encampments and challenges with homelessness over and above Reaching Home that are in the current federal budget. I'm glad that you're using your voice to actually draw attention to this problem because it is a real problem. It's not fair that people in a country as wealthy as Canada go to bed without a roof over their head. I want to help. I can tell you that we're putting money behind that desire to help as well, and we're going to work with members across the country to help ensure community organizations in their regions are supported.
Well, I appreciate that because, you know, what I see happening in my community in Timmins, I know it's as bad and worse in other northern communities. And the Northern Ontario's always learned if we don't stick together, we fall really hard. So one of the efforts was Thunder Bay Social Services Administration Board, and they have the highest opioid-related mortality rates in all the Ontario Public Health Unit region, 77.2 per 100,000. So they've reached out to work with Cochrane District. They've reached out to work with Kenora. So everybody's coming to the table to try and find solutions. And it's the one thing that's really inspiring in this crisis. They've asked to have the government recognize the work that they're doing through Reaching Home, because they're also taking the enormous pressure of Treaty 9 communities where we have, 18, 20 people living in 3-bedroom homes. So Kenora, Thunder Bay, Cochrane District are under enormous pressure from the housing crisis that is 10,000 times worse up in Treaty 9. So they've been reaching out to Mushkegowuk, to Nan. So will the federal government be willing to sit with them and say, yeah, we recognize the larger Northern Ontario issue, because a single municipality just simply can't take this on?
Look, when communities come to understand that that they can care about one another as much as they do themselves, you're going to help more vulnerable people with that approach. If your request is that we make time, we will make time. If your request is to personally sit down with me to go over some of these details, I will make time.
It's on the record now, folks.
Yeah.
Charlie Angus just asked him to sit down and make time. You're all watching. You're all witnesses. We're going to sit down and we're going to make time.
I'll look forward to it immensely, Charlie.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So, Minister Fraser, I believe I heard you say to our colleague from Quebec that you believe the National Housing Strategy has exceeded its objectives. The Nanos Pocketbook Index that came out this week showed that young Canadians are at an all-time low in the history of the index in how they feel about their personal finances. Do Do you consider that exceeding your objectives?
No, and to be clear, I was partway through an answer, but I wanted to respect Madame Chabot's opportunity to move on to the next question. It's exceeded the targets that were set at the time. We need to change the landscape because the landscape. We need to change the policy approach because the landscape has changed. When we launched the National Housing Strategy, it was focused disproportionately around affordable housing for low-income families back in 2017. The last few years, things have fundamentally shifted. Young people, middle-class families are feeling the affordability pinch. The housing shortage is impacting all of us, which is why we've seen such a rapid increase in the policy adoption baked into the National Housing Plan that we put out recently, because we understand that we need to do more and do differently.
So would it be fair then to say that your government that promised affordable housing to young people in 2015 continues to promise it now, that perhaps your objectives have been wrong over the past 9 years, and young Canadians may be right to not believe your promises today?
I'm not asking anyone to believe promises. I'm asking them to compare the plans that different folks are putting on the table. And there's no contest. We're the only party who's put forward a serious plan to address the national housing crisis. And those who work in the housing space are saying so. I do think that we needed to do more. Had we moved sooner, we would have been further along. But it was the first time in 30 years that the federal government had stepped back into the affordable housing space. And the National Housing Strategy was a positive development in that regard. But in particular, since 2021, the latter part of the pandemic and since, we've seen a lot of the housing stock built up. We've seen the supply has been exhausted, and the cost of building with inflationary pressures has increased the cost of building, which has a negative impact on the pace of building. So we need to do more. I'm not going to look anybody in the eye and tell them things are perfect when it comes to housing. I'm going to be the first to say I know we need to do more, but then I'm going to be the person who actually goes and does it.
Well, as you say you want to do more, I'd like to draw your attention to an example from the Edmonton area, a young man named Harley, who I think is an example similar to many young people I hear from and many of our colleagues hear from, who explained that he did everything right, everything he was asked to do. He worked hard, he went to school, he got a high-paying job. Now he wants to move into a bigger place, and rent has become so high that he says, and I quote, "If I move into a nicer place, it's basically like I'm working a minimum wage job. I'm just trying to make ends meet." Where does Harley fit into you exceeding your objectives?
Harley is the kind of person that was in mind when we developed the National Housing Plan. I'll be the first to say, although we may have exceeded the objectives that we've set in terms of number of units at the outset of the National Housing Strategy, we now need to do more because the circumstances have changed, and Harley's not the only person in that situation. Harley fits into our plan to help build more homes by accelerating the pace of home building, by reducing the cost of building, making it easier to build more homes. Harley fits into our plan when we're looking at helping people transition into home ownership. Harley fits into our plan when we look at the Renters' Bill of Rights that we're putting forward. There's a number of different...
Would it be fair to say, though, that Harley has every good reason to be concerned, perhaps hearing you speak, because under your government, mortgage payments have doubled, rent payments have doubled, and yet you seem to be having a very different tone and message when you talk about housing in this country than what a lot of young people. When I hear young people speak, I hear words like stuck, trapped, unfair, and you're out here saying you're exceeding objectives. That seems very tone deaf to what's going on.
So to be clear, I don't think that there has been enough done on housing and we need to do more. I'm not trying to say because we exceeded a target that was established in 2017 that all problems are solved, and I don't want to be misinterpreted in that regard. We need to do more, and I find it ironic when I hear some of these arguments being advanced by the Conservative side when you don't have measures in your plan to increase the pace of home building.
Forgive me if you have frustrations with what you regard to be our party's position, but I think young people across this country are rightly frustrated that we were promised affordable housing in 2015 when you first got elected. It's 9 years later, and the promises that you're making are identical while things have only gotten worse.
With respect, the policies that we're committing to are not identical. This is, as many observers will tell you, the most ambitious housing plan in half a century that Canada has seen. This is a different and more substantive plan that was put out in 2017 because we've seen in the last few years affordability challenges mount at an extraordinary pace. We want to do more to address this changing landscape. That's why we have significantly more tax measures to increase the pace of home building. It's why we're working with municipalities to reduce barriers to building. It's why we're putting measures on table to help young people get into the market if they want to become owners and to help build more rental stock to bring the price down if they want to remain renters. There are unique challenges that exist today that are different fundamentally than existed even 3 years ago, not just 9 years ago, and we need to continue to adapt and increase our ambition if we're going to meet the needs of young people today. I'm not asking them just to believe our words. I'm asking them to look at our plan and to see themselves in it.
Just let me say this, Minister. It does puzzle me when we look at the Conservatives and how critical they are with really a lack of a plan to address this issue, that they just don't put a plan forward. And I mean, there's half-hearted measures. The leader of the Conservative Party just wants to fight with municipalities. And I'd like to ask you, I mean, obviously the leader of the Conservative Party, in my opinion, has been hiding his plan and delaying debate on his private member's bill. So, if his plan is so great, why doesn't the Conservative leader just share his plan with Canadians? Thank you.
Look, Mr. Long, I can't speak for him, but I find it curious that the private members' bill he's put forward continues to be delayed. I expect it's because it's been widely criticized for folks who operate in the housing space. It's been very poorly received. They did publish a plan, but it doesn't have any policies around some of the issues we've been asked about today. It doesn't have any policies that address municipal zoning reform. It doesn't have any policies that address development cost charges. It doesn't have any policies that address homelessness or affordable housing. What it actually does is very curious. It increases taxes on new rental construction by putting the GST back on units. When you look at the proposed super fund, it represents a nearly 98% cut to funding to support municipalities to increase their targets. It only applies in 22 communities across Canada, none of which in my region would benefit. I look at some of the members represented here, that their plan specifically excludes some represented by the Conservative members here. It's including Muskoka, including Durham, including Kelowna. They don't benefit from the Conservative plan. We see that it's got some bizarre policies around a NIMBY snitch line to hire a lot of public servants to answer the phone if somebody doesn't like their neighbor's housing policies. When it comes to public land, it has a plan to sell off 6,000 properties to the highest bidder with no control for affordability that will forever release them from public ownership. I expect, because the plan is going to have a severe negative impact on home building in Canada, that's likely the reason that Mr. Poilievre won't bring it forward in the House of Commons for debate.
Minister, the federal housing advocate told CBC News on February 14th that homelessness encampments represent, quote, a physical manifestation of exactly how broken our housing and homelessness system is from coast to coast to coast in Canada. Would you agree that encampments show how broken our housing and homelessness system is in Canada under your government?
There's a number of different factors that go into challenges around homelessness. What I find curious consistently is all of the questions I'm receiving from my Conservative colleagues are about subjects
Minister,
where they don't have any proposals
you're not
to actually address the challenges.
So
there is not a
question.
single policy that the Conservatives have put forward.
Point of order. We just want to hear the responses. We're hearing the question. The responses matter as much.
Ms. Gray, I'll ask you to wind up with your last question, and I'll give the Minister the chance to respond. Then we're going to Mr. Morris.
Well, Minister, you haven't shown any results even in your own home province. It was reported that in Halifax, homeless encampments are at double capacity, and the City of Halifax is now looking for more land to build more encampments. So I'll ask you again, you've been in government for 9 years. There's 16 months until the next election. By what month will Canadians see fewer homeless encampments in our communities?
Look, I think it'll depend on the specific a specific community. I expect we're going to see serious progress in the near future because we're putting serious resources on the table. There is more money that's going towards addressing very serious challenges in Halifax to address encampments specifically, in fact. There's more money that's being put towards building more affordable housing, not just in Halifax,
Serious
but in
progress isn't
Kelowna,
a
as
date,
you would know
Minister.
as well.
Mr. Morris for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. Minister, as you know, my community's been hit particularly hard by the housing crisis that we are in, including the number of people living unsheltered having tripled in recent years. I appreciate you've at least talked about how non-market housing is deeply affordable and a really important part of the solution. Your statistic is a little bit high. It's 3.5% is the total number of social housing. It's the bottom of the G7 that we are as a country right now. I also appreciate that you've made time to meet with some non-market, non-profit housing providers in my community. They are ready to build, from KW Rehabilitation to House of Friendship, Indwell, the Working Center, One Roof. And so they were looking at this year's and last year's budget. Budget 2023, there was nothing. Fall Economic Statement 2023, there was nothing. Budget 2024, the Rapid Housing Fund that they were looking towards has been cut. It's $100 million, down from round 3 was $750 million a year. So we missed a year, and now it's cut. The Rental Protection Fund is important, but there's only $5 million for the whole country there. And then Reaching Home, it's $225 million across the country in this year's budget. So my question for you is, why cut rapid housing when it's been such a critical program for nonprofits to build housing? And can you commit to those Reaching Home dollars reaching Waterloo Region? Because we need them.
Look, thanks very much. And I would just disagree with your characterization of some of these cuts. With rapid housing, for example, there was the end of one program, and we haven't just gotten rid of it. We have now put more money into non-market housing through the Affordable Housing Fund, which includes a rapid housing stream. One of the reasons we wish to do that is because we want to leverage money from other levels of government. The Rapid Housing Initiative was a great opportunity during the pandemic to move quickly with buildings that could be 100% financed by the federal government. Now that we have an opportunity to bring other levels of government on board quickly when we know what the shared projects are, I think we can do more. So although the year-over-year spend may go down under one program, the total on affordable housing will go up. But that's a reflection of one program ending, not a decision to cut funding within that program, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Thank you, Minister.